Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We have a good one for you, as always, on the show today. We continue with, surprise, surprise, the latest from the Israel-Gaza war. The war in Gaza continuing now as dozens of Palestinians were killed in intense Israeli bombardments overnight in the Jabalia refugee camp in the north and Sabra in western Gaza. Thousands of Palestinians, meanwhile, are walking miles to flee the fighting and Israeli bombardment in northern Gaza as Israel tightens its stranglehold around Hamas, even though, as we see, some really incredible videos of Hamas just blowing up tanks at close range, running up to tanks, placing these rockets on, really just incredible stuff. We'll take a look at that and some of the other broader, kind of more stupider reaction from around the world, especially here in the United States. And also, we have a whole host of clips from what was probably the most unhinged Republican debate we'll have yet. So we are going to go through some of those comments little by little. Apparently, we had some, keep my daughter's name out of your mouth moments that were pretty interesting, and of course just floundering from some of the most pathetic politicians probably in America today. The people still up on the Republican debate stage acting like they have a chance. Anyway, we've got a good show for you all. Thank you so much for joining us. This is your News Flash. So we start off with some pretty remarkable, kind of reporting and just a lot of very kind of similar of what we have heard for quite a while coming out of the Gaza Strip at this point. Apparently, we continue to see intense Israel bombardments overnight in the Jabalia camp in western Gaza. And also, we're continuing to see this pretty horrific pictures of Palestinians fleeing on, whatever they can on foot, on carts drawn by donkeys and animals and stuff like that. It's like the freaking Middle Ages or something. Like, they are really being pushed and ethnically cleansed, and images that have just been kind of circulated all around Israel, really all around the world on social media, and really kind of seeming to play into a Israeli narrative that they have wanted to achieve for quite a long time. So yeah, this really comes as it has been a pretty surprising, of course, the Israeli army with their, increasing bombardment of the Strip and their really destruction of, probably a few Hamas fighters. Hopefully they got a few Hamas fighters in all those bombings that they did. They came in and they, have, according to all reports, essentially is encircled the northern part of Gaza City, of course, all while bombing. Again, it needs to be said, all while bombing, the safe zones, the safe areas that they were supposed to lay out for people in the central and southern parts of Gaza repeatedly, including the Jabalia refugee camp. So this comes as there has been a surprising, it's hard to characterize the response because we're getting, again, so little reliable information from the ground with spotty communication coming out. I feel like every few days we see just a bunch of posts, or at least I'm seeing a bunch of posts from, the various figures, from, Motaz Ariza, from, Pisan, from Plestia, all these various people who have been incredibly brave posting on the Gaza Strip and, have just been repeatedly targeted by, journalists and have been repeatedly, these journalists that have been repeatedly targeted by Israeli forces. And it's not going to be a surprise to see, I would not be surprised if one of those kind of major figures that so many people have kind of latched on to in the start of this conflict for information about what's going on. I would not be surprised if one of them ends up, unfortunately, tragically, God forbid, no longer with us by the end of this conflict, because it just proved to be such an important part of the information war that we have seen coming out, recently, just with this increasingly malfunctioning, Zionist Hezbollah. This is kind of the word they have for their propaganda. It has been proven increasingly that they are just in a very, very bad way. They're talking about some sort of, a terrorist attack Hezbollah tried to do in Brazil, for some reason trying to attack the most popular the biggest anti-Israel country in the world. Hezbollah's trying to attack them, but Israel itself, stuff on the borders, trying to do terrorism as they are so apparently want to do inside Israel. No, we don't really. Brazil, that's going to be our focus. So again, just this very just weird distortions and increasingly implausible sounding stories, and increasingly implausible sounding these audio tapes that when they first came out with the Al-Shifa hospital bombing, I remember everybody was all up in arms about it. Everyone was like, this is a really remarkable piece of audio that they were able to capture. People are debating about it, thinking, is it true? Is it not true? But now it's like I feel like people have not realized that the Israeli Defense Forces have been releasing videos like this on a pretty weekly basis, like, almost 1 hour every 2 weeks. Like, we found, this other Hamas audio tape. It's like, again, nobody's believing this stuff. Nobody is believing this stuff. It's just like, they didn't really believe it the first time, but now, like, 4 times in, you think it's getting any better? It's just like, just come on. It's like, it's really a joke. So the group has been apparently, successfully confronting Israel's military, destroying several tanks and vehicles in videos that I have, seen myself on Twitter. They're pretty, popularly shared. And that, really does make it quite hard with the kind of poor communication, it really does make it quite hard to get a accurate, fair, realistic sense of what's going on the Gaza Strip, because it's very possible, we could be seeing, that those tanks don't represent the full image. They're getting some, they're destroying a lot of tanks, but the damage will come from Israel just marching on, taking some casualties, probably more than they would have liked or would have expected maybe going in, but broadly the goal is accomplished. Kind of like how it was with the 2006 war in Hezbollah, where Israel kind of was embarrassed. They really had a lot of they lost a very surprising amount of tanks, and it kind of did give their army a little bit of less credence. But it seems like Hamas may even be eclipsing that level. But of course, the information is so unreliable, and the really interesting, actually interesting stuff. It really starts to tell. It really does, I think the truth will eventually come out, once, UN people get more of a better idea. But it's like, you're not going to hear, obviously, you can't really, trust Hamas videos to tell, the full stories, because they are propaganda videos. They're put out for propaganda purposes, obviously. But you obviously can't, trust Israel or, NBC or CNN that are getting their, reporting straight from Israel, and can only really go with the Israeli military when they say, everything's going fine, we're encircling, like nothing's happening. Probably odds are it's a little bit, kind of caught in the middle. But anyway, thousands of Palestinians were walking miles to flee the fighting and the Israeli bombardment in northern Gaza. As Israel said, again, it is strengthening its tightening stranglehold on Hamas, which I personally find to be quite interesting, because it's like, you are looking at a situation where, like, these images are going to go, again, around worldwide. It is just this image of people, fleeing their homes with, what little belongings they can carry. And especially if they are not allowed back into their homes, which, frankly, it would take a miracle for them to be allowed back in their homes, or be allowed to rebuild, or just be allowed to come back in general, with the kind of insistent, like, they're not quite ready to say it yet. But, we had this Israeli government minister kind of make allusions to it, and this other official that he had to, kind of walk back. And, but they are, and then, of course, you have the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying you're going to assume control of the security situation. Like, they're starting to get up to the fact that they are going to at least occupy Gaza for some period of time. And whether that comes to, letting all the people back in is, it's highly doubtful. Let's put it that way. Highly doubtful. You don't know till you know, but you kind of do know. Is the situation with this. Israel's PM Benjamin Netanyahu has again rejected the prospect of a ceasefire without the release of captives. And again, this comes as Hamas has, offered to release captives in exchange for a 3-day ceasefire. I think Blinken has been trying to push this together, a 3-day ceasefire for release of some captives, including, some American citizens. But that obviously is never going to be accepted by Netanyahu, who has shown with his bombing campaign, he is much more focused about, as, in the words of his government, damage, not precision, damage, not accuracy. Like, that is what he is going for unquestionably and undeniably. And that has come at the cost of at least, this is honestly a low estimate, 10,569 Palestinians killed in Israeli attacks on Gaza since October 7th. In Israel, the death toll over the same period stands at more than 1,400. And again, we're seeing, I think it's important to note that the debate, I think, it's kind of an important narrative because we saw Israel almost kind of make a little bit of a public relations mistake and post the names of all the people, as we've seen, they clearly get a little bit jealous of seeing, this, or kind of copying the strategy of the activists here in America in terms of posting out and presenting the names for all the dead Gaza children, which we've seen very impactfully be done at the Washington, D.C. march over the weekend, where there was, a block-long list displayed on, you could see it from above on the city streets, of just all of the dead kids and the dead people and dead civilians over the years, in what is a really, really tragic situation. And it seems like that, they tried to do that in the Israeli account. Like, we will never forget their names and all this stuff. And again, half of the list, and again, this is obviously not, the whole list. So, we don't know which percentage, whether it's 2/3 were military or 1/3 or 1/2. But again, right now it's being discussed like none of them were military. And we very, very, very well know that that is not true. There were at least a third, I think it's the lowest estimate that I've seen, of Israeli captives, were military people. So we're talking about 400 or 500 people that were killed were, part of that military response, or, were manning a lot of the military targets around the Gaza border that were also targeted by Hamas, in addition to, and again, keyword, in addition to, the civilian targets. But, I think correcting that narrative and giving people a broader, better understanding of what happened and what happened on that day, as we wait for the truth to come out, we wait for, UN investigations, the dust to settle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They are, I think that narrative has to be, put in there, because I think, you may call me crazy, but I think the Israeli government posting that list of names is a pretty good source for the veracity of the list of names and the fact that many of those people were military members. So we are learning a little bit more as well about the type of attacks Hamas has been conducting in Gaza. And according to the Institute for the Study of War, the Washington, D.C. based think tank, they are conducting hit-and-run attacks against Israeli forces, as the armed group likely intends to focus its main defensive efforts on the center of Gaza City, according to, again, the ISW. Harassing Israeli forces north of Gaza City with anti-tank rockets and mortars while preserving its more advanced weapons and tactics is consistent with Hamas's attempt to fight a long war to force Israel into a ceasefire. Again, so they're trying to, it's like a little bit debated whether or not they fully, completed the surrounding the encirclement of Gaza City like they wanted to do. But, it seems like they're pretty close. I think this encirclement will be a much, kind of the prelude to a much longer kind of inner city, Raqqa, Mosul, or even Mariupol, or, any of those kind of deep, intense, Aleppo, for example, like all these very kind of intense urban battles that we've seen over the past, 20, 10, 15 years, is going to be much more like that, and that's going to be kind of coming soon. Hamas has not used more complex or advanced systems and tactics, such as house-borne improvised explosive devices, explosively formed penetrators, advanced anti-tank missiles, or larger, more complex road-buried IEDs. The think tank said this suggests Hamas is weighting its main effort in Gaza City rather than the northern Gaza Strip, which seems to be, I guess, not to be all in the kind of a Hamas war room here, but, it seems like it's an area that can better defend in kind of this, apocalyptic hellhole of Israel's own kind of situation here, or of Israel's own making in the Gaza Strip. They have a tweet about this. Seems like an interesting kind of source to follow here, just for straight up war analysis. So again, they go as of November 8th. They are kind of looking at the kind of critical threats about Lebanese Hezbollah and unspecified militants conducting 7 cross-border attacks targeting military and civilian Israeli targets along the border with Lebanon. Hamas forces north of Gaza City conducting hit-and-run attacks that harass Israeli forces part of a probable screening operation for a main defensive effort in central Gaza City. And the Islamic resistance in Iraq claimed 3 attacks targeting U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. which is going to be pretty interesting. We just got reports recently, just before we started the show today, of the Houthis in Yemen shooting down a U.S. drone. The Islamic Resistance, they claimed those 3 attacks targeting U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, and Hamas political bureau deputy chairman said that Palestinians in the West Bank will respond to the Israeli ground operation in the Gaza Strip. So it sounds like there is going to be, kind of little, movement on that. And Hezbollah, by the way, not looking too crazy, but we have seen some kind of fights in this kind of encirclement kind of along that Wadi Gaza line, that push that people were told to, flee to, that safe line that people were told to flee to. That there's kind of if you look at the Gaza Strip from north to south, you have Israeli kind of blue territory conquered, up in the north around Beit Hanun, which is a kind of major high refugee population around there, and Beit Lahia, all around down to Jabalia, which they're kind of trying to move on as they get closer to Al-Shifa Hospital, which is right by the coast, in Gaza City, which is a little bit further south from places like Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia. These are all kind of they're all kind of instances and video, or kind of videos and instances and evidence that we've seen of fighting going around in these areas, as Hamas and Palestinian Islamic fighters near Al-Sultan and Al-Tom streets fired anti-tank rockets and mortars at Israel forces, and it hit at least 8 hit-and-run attacks. So, the IDF there released footage showing apparently Israel infantry destroying a Hamas tunnel near the UNRWA-run Beit Hanun school. So that is what is reportedly, apparently, we've also seen they've tried to say something near the hospital was an entrance to a Hamas tunnel that was clearly a, water pipe situation, like, or a water reservoir situation, not the most convincing of displays there, in my opinion. I think Al Jazeera did a great job kind of showing how that was part of the construction, and they had engineers testifying to say there was no Hamas activity there, and multiple doctors who worked there saying there was never any kind of sign of Hamas activity, and so that narrative I think should be in some ways put to the test, but it's very interesting and important to look at how this has played out. The Israeli military has identified on Thursday the latest military personnel killed as 29-year-old Eliyahu Makayes. The military said Makayes, who served in the engineer corps, was killed during Wednesday's fighting, and 3 others were injured. Apparently, as of Wednesday, more than 31 Israeli soldiers have been killed during the Gaza ground offensive, and over 260 injured. The official figures do not yet include the numbers announced on Thursday. So that is probably, I would, if I had to guess, not something they're pretty thrilled with. We're only a week into this ground invasion, and they're already taking casualties like that. Probably not something that they want. Meanwhile, Australian Greens, the Green Party, have called for a ceasefire now as they push to be the first Western government to really get behind that. Meanwhile, Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Iranian counterpart Ibrahim Raisi are expected to attend a summit in Uzbekistan's capital, Tashkent, amid renewed diplomatic interest in the region amid the conflict in Gaza. The Tehran, which backs the Palestinian group Hamas, says it wants to discuss the conflict, according to the state-run news agency IRNA. It's going to be very interesting to see how Turkey gets involved there. Erdogan, who's also hardened his tone against both Israel and its Western supporters, is also likely to bring this issue to the table. Over the weekend, Turkey recalled its ambassador to Israel, Sakir Ozan Torunlar, and as it called for a ceasefire in Gaza. Sakir Özkan Torunlar. And Iran has obviously no diplomatic relations with Israel. All right, we are going to move on to our next angle on this. And there's a kind of interesting thread from Breaking the Silence I saw on Twitter. They are an Israeli veterans organization aimed at raising awareness of the dire consequences of a prolonged military occupation. And they had this to say. Everyone's blood is boiling. We all know someone who was murdered, kidnapped, or who is still missing. Many are talking about revenge, about erasing Gaza, and referring to its residents as 2.5 million terrorists, discussing forcible transfer. But what's actually happening on the ground? Gaza has been under an unprecedented bombardment for a month now. In the first 2 weeks, the Israeli Air Force dropped more bombs on Gaza than the U.S. dropped in Afghanistan in an entire year. One explanation is Israel's genuine need to remove threats to ground forces, but this doesn't fully explain the scope of the bombing or the targets. They say, our work is based on testimonies given by soldiers. Collecting and verifying these testimonies is a long and complex process, and it'll be quite some time before we get a full and accurate picture of what's happening on the ground. Still, statements made by senior Israeli officials towards the extent of the destruction already raised some suspicions. The army is following the exact same doctrine it used in previous operations, which I think is really kind of a great comparison here to the 2006 Lebanon war comes in. It's called the Dahia Doctrine. The Dahia Doctrine was formulated in 2006, and its main tenet was disproportionate attacks, including civilian structures, against civilian structures and infrastructure more broadly. So sometimes we're seeing targeting places, again, like hospitals, ambulances, and then, more civilian targets like apartment buildings, really just raised en masse. And if the doctrine is indeed in play here, as it appears to be, then the massive bombings on Gaza in recent weeks are deliberately aimed at damaging infrastructure and property belonging to innocent civilians. The heavy bombings of the 2006 Lebanon war did not wipe out Hezbollah or neutralize its military capabilities, nor were they supposed to. They are meant to create deterrence. Since then, though, Hezbollah has grown stronger and is now firing at civilians in northern Israel daily. This is a conflict I think that people just, in Israel just don't seem to understand, that they, if you make the cost high enough or something, they'll go away or just leave you alone. I think this shows, and especially the response to, all over the world to this stuff, in the U.S., around the Western world, that people are deeply moved by the plight of the Palestinians and will really do quite a lot to, defend them and stick up for them, and are not going to forget about them easily. There was a real kind of assumption that things have been forgotten, but especially the super, super strong reaction from the Arab world, and the people, I should say, of the Arab world has shown that is not quite the case at all. In Lebanon, too, we wreaked massive destruction on civilians to buy temporary calm and nothing more. Israel has also used this doctrine during the last grand invasion of Gaza in 2014. Following the war, Gaza residents returned to neighborhoods that were razed to the ground. Journalists and soldiers who took part in the operation described the enormous damage. Politicians and members of the security establishment waxed victorious, claiming we'd sear the Palestinian consciousness, which, by the way, is terrorism. That is, this is a terrorist force. This is a government that is built on spreading terror to, as many people as possible, who they deem to be not part of their state. Trying to essentially saying that, meaning every Palestinian will remember, who's boss, who's going to be in charge, and will dare to resist. The last month has proved once again that this is the approach that has brought us zero security. This doctrine is based on the idea of rounds of fighting, as they're referred to in Israel. It's not meant to be decisive, but to postpone and deter the next inevitable round. It looks like, again, just like this mowing the grass approach was incredibly popular within both sides, both the Netanyahu and the kind of more moderate centrist liberal side. Like, they believe in this mowing the grass strategy of, every few years they're going to have to get a little bit, too crazy, and we're going to have to kind of mow them down and shut them down and, clear them out, which is really, incredibly dark, incredibly macabre stuff, and shows their, true regard, which is not really much for human life. They say, one thing is certain. The answer must take into account a free and safe future for everyone, citizens of Israel, residents of Gaza, and yes, residents of the West Bank too. Otherwise, the next war is only a matter of time. Making a pretty good case for this kind of a security situation, and the created through the policies of Israel, and the fact that it is hurting Israeli civilians en large and en masse as well. And, they are almost creating an unsafe environment for themselves with their continued indecisive but devastating attacks on civilians. All right. That being said, it's time to talk debate. So again, a pretty much incredibly irrelevant debate. Nikki Haley kind of on the stage, Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, the big three competitors at the the kids table. And we, I don't think you should obviously describe kind of any political value. It's going to be Trump. It's going to be Biden. RFK there making a pretty big dent for himself at, quarter of the vote. Pretty incredible stuff in the New York Times Siena poll the same poll that we talked about on Monday, by the way. And that doesn't mean, though, we can't have some fun by looking at some of the crazy clips in this debate. And I think we got to start, though, with our prior topic, the Israel-Hamas war. This is Nikki Haley on the I think Ron DeSantis also kind of weighing in here too as well. This is Nikki Haley's take. This is supposedly a moderate foreign policy expert Republican talking about this, the Israel-Hamas war.
Ambassador Haley, what would you do? What would you be urging Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to do? Would you consider humanitarian pause, for example?
The first thing I said to him when it happened was I said, finish them. Finish them. And the reason is I worked on this every day when I was at the United Nations. And we have to remember that they have to, 1, eliminate Hamas, 2, support Israel with whatever they need whenever they need it, and 3, make sure we bring our hostages home. We need to be very clear-eyed to know there would be no Hamas without Iran. There would be no Hezbollah without Iran. There would not be the Houthis without Iran. And there wouldn't be the Iranian militias in Syria and Iraq that are trying to hit our military men and women if it hadn't been for Iran. And who is...
Ambassador.
Again, so kind of a very unpopular kind of hawkish stance towards Iran there, which I think is interesting. But also, it does kind of remind, and it does kind of bring to kind of raise the question, how would Biden be fundamentally different from this? Like, are you going to say, oh yeah, Biden's kind of just barely supporting the humanitarian pause, and then just being kind of dragged into it, refusing to support a ceasefire, almost with the logic being, we'll get some time to get our American civilians out, essentially, and then, Israel can have at it. How is that position fundamentally going to be any major change? How is that going to be any major improvement from, Joe Biden's situation? And again, it just seems like with a position of someone who maybe has the slight, maybe at least people in his administration probably want him to influence Israel to do some good. What good is having those people in there, as some sort of positive force if he's going to refuse to listen to them, refuse to exercise any significant leverage over Israel, and essentially to do them whatever they want? How is that going to make such a big change, such a major difference when Nikki Haley or whoever, or Trump, for example, gets in there and also continues to let Benjamin Netanyahu do whatever he wants? Here's another one. Here's Vivek Ramaswamy gets on pretty hefty about that. And here's what he had to say about this, kind of broader position, because Ramaswamy's trying to be this kind of populist, right-wing, anti-war type guy. But also he has to call for the complete and total destruction of Hamas and the ability for Israel to do whatever he wants. But here is how he kind of finished that answer on that subject.
Fact of the matter is the Republican Party is not that much better. You have the likes of Nikki Haley, who stepped down from her time at the UN. Bankrupt or in debt was her family. Then she becomes a military contractor. She joins the board of Boeing and otherwise, and is now a multimillionaire. So I think that's wrong when Republicans do it or Democrats do it. That's the choice we face. Do you want a leader from a different generation who's going to put this country first? Or do you want Dick Cheney in 3-inch heels?
All right, Mr.
In which case, we've got 2 of them on stage.
Mr. Ramaswamy, thank you. Senator Scott, yes. Senator, same question to you about, you're the president, you're on the phone.
I don't know. I feel like people, of course, Haley stands are going to be like, oh, that's a little misogynistic comment there. Like that explanation, the history there by Ramaswamy didn't make any sense. But, Dick Cheney and 3-inch heels, not a bad description of Nikki Haley. But here is her response.
I'd first like to say they're 5-inch heels, and I don't wear them unless you can run in them.
Okay. Pop off, Nikki.
What I will say is I wear heels. They're not for a fashion statement. They're for ammunition. What we said first.
Okay. Okay. With your that one was not the best. Here's Tim Scott trying to get a joke in.
Because even then, there was a rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses. We must force the people off those campuses and,
Senator
frankly,
Scott, thank you.
out of our country.
Let me turn to the Governor DeSantis here.
Because even then,
you never see a moderator cut through that quickly. He was just looking for any break to have. He was just like, I'm not feeling this. I don't really care that much about anti-Semitism on college campuses. I'm like hard right evangelical. And then the guy goes, Senator Scott, and then he just crumbles right away. So anyway, Ramaswamy then goes on to go to the other major, which is also kind of a funny story we haven't really talked about, but the just continuing, just falling apart of any desire to support Ukraine. And here's what Ramaswamy had to say on this, which is really kind of shocking remarks for someone on a kind of a mainstream political stage, especially compared to the way things were a year ago.
Mr. Ramaswamy, are you persuaded by President Zelensky's urgent new plea? Where do you stand on more funding?
I'm absolutely unpersuaded. And I'm actually enjoying watching the Ukraine hawks quietly, delicately tiptoe back from their position as this thing has unwound into a disaster. The first half of this race, I was the only person standing for it.
He's
now they're actually quietly coming around
He's kind of
to
got a
being more
point.
cautious as they should. Level with the American people here. Ukraine is not a paragon of democracy. This is a country that has banned 11 opposition parties. It has consolidated all media into one state TV media arm. That's not democratic. It has threatened not to hold elections this year unless the U.S. forks over more money. That is not democratic. It has celebrated a Nazi in its ranks, the comedian in cargo pants, a man called Zelensky, doing it in their own ranks. That is not democratic. More facts for you that you won't hear from the mainstream in either party or the mainstream media. The regions of Ukraine that are occupied by Russia right now in the Donbass, Luhansk, Donetsk, these are Russian-speaking regions that have not even been part of Ukraine since 2014, that other people probably couldn't name those provinces for you. Those are the hard facts. And so to frame this as some kind of battle between good versus evil, don't buy it. And I'd like...
Yeah, again, I think he's got a pretty good point there. Like, on it, like that was something that I think you're not going to see many people on the right say, or even on the left, especially on the left. I think you're not going to get any kind of broader political constituency for that, as long as there's no more aid, which is kind of looking pretty more and more likely for Mr. Zelensky. But he is really, really right about that, and I feel like it's very unlikely that we'll be able to kind of get away fully without anything happening that really redounds negatively back on us. So that's something only time will tell. Some kind of crazy Ukrainian group or that region further destabilized by all the weapons and money that we pumped in the area. But some of the things that Ramaswamy said there, they kind of cut through a little bit. They don't, I wouldn't say Zelensky is a Nazi, but the fact that Canada was applauding an SS member, just before this, whole Israel-Palestine thing popped off, that doesn't really speak too well about the kind of the political culture in Ukraine. And a lot of the stuff that Zelensky said there was true when it comes to chaos in the region. And again, that really the only impact that has for Americans, and when they come to the polling booth, it's like, is this going to affect me? Am I going to have to send my military family member? Are they going to have to go over there? Are we going to have to send more money over there? Like, that is what they care about. And I think Ramaswamy is making a pretty good case there that it is not going to be. Yeah, so we are, here's a little bit of a meanwhile situation. We have Fox covering, kind of going back and forth between the, the Hialeah Trump rally and this Republican debate, but also we have Nikki Haley versus Ron DeSantis. This is kind of an interesting little battle here. Let's go to that.
Speak to the parents out there. There are probably TikTok apps on half the phones in this auditorium.
I'm going to speak to the fact that two people hit me and you didn't let me respond. So let's first talk about the fact that they want to talk about the Chinese land from 10 years ago. Yes, I brought a fiberglass company 10 years ago to South Carolina. But Ron, you are the chair of your economic development agency that as of last week said Florida is the ideal place for Chinese businesses. Not only that, you have a company that is manufacturer of Chinese military planes. You have it. They are expanding 2 training sites at 2 of your airports now, one which is 12 miles away from a naval base. Then you have another company that's expanding, and they were just invaded by the Department of Homeland Security. So mine was 10 years ago.
You gave
Yours
them
was
stuff.
6
I
months
didn't
ago.
give them anything.
What's your story?
And I abolished that agency that she's talking about.
No,
Enterprise Florida, we abolished it. And, of course, we banned China from buying
the
land.
website
Not
last
exactly
week.
a
Go
great
check.
recruiting pitch if you're banning them from purchasing land.
You scrubbed the website
So we've stood up and
week.
we've done the right thing in Florida.
So yeah, kind of a little bit of back and forth here, but here is the clip. I think one on this one that everyone is talking about. This is Nikki Haley versus Vivek Ramaswamy on TikTok.
TikTok ban if you use it.
Well, I want to laugh at why Nikki Haley didn't answer your question, which was about looking at families in the eye. In the last debate, she made fun of me for actually joining TikTok while her own daughter was actually using the app for a long time. So you might want to take care of your family first.
Leave my daughter out of your voice.
Your adult daughter. The next generation of Americans are using it. And that's actually the point. You have her supporters propping her up. That's fine. Here's the truth. The easy answer is actually to say that we're just going to ban one app. We got to go further. We have to ban any U.S. company actually transferring U.S. data to the Chinese. Here's a story most people don't know. Airbnb.
Again, really just boring stuff. But anyway, it is really just the bottom line there is that 75 minutes into this debate, and there has not been a question on abortion on or last night's election results, where they were pretty badly defeated throughout the board there. But anyway, I love to have some fun watching some of the clownish folks on that debate stage, and thinking about, I don't know, what TikTok dances is Nikki Haley's daughter doing. I really feel like I don't want to know, believe it or not, even if Vivek is very interested. All right, all the time we got for you guys today. We're back on Friday with a new episode of Hell Island. Go check out the first one now, wherever you get your podcast.